Hey everybody, welcome back to our channel From House to Homestead. Happy New Year, and I thought I would try something a little different today. I am not a baker or a cook by any means, but we have a blueberry scone recipe that we really like, and I thought I would make that for you today. Scones seem to be something that a lot of people like, but they're kind of intimidated by, and they're actually not that hard to make. If I can make them, you can make them, definitely. So I went ahead and did some pre-prep, took some inspiration from America's Test Kitchen. If you haven't ever watched that show, it is great. It's amazing. But they are cooks, and they are, people who enjoy being in the kitchen, which I am not. So I don't do everything, but I do definitely get some inspiration from them sometimes, and they do feature a lot of really cool gadgets. So anyway, let's get started. The version that I'm going to be making today is the gluten-free version, but if you don't need gluten-free, or you don't like gluten-free, or have the things for gluten-free, I will put the recipe in the description that is not gluten-free, so you can decide however you want to do it. Also, the ingredients that we use are the ingredients that we can eat, so feel free to make substitutions. Like, we actually use real butter. If you can't eat butter, or someone in your house can't have dairy, then feel free to substitute that butter for margarine. You could probably substitute it for Crisco, something like that. I don't think the flavor would be as good as if you substitute with Crisco, but if that's what you want to use, you're welcome to do that. We also use heavy cream, which is what the recipe calls for. I'm not sure what the equivalent would be in a non-dairy option, but if you're used to cooking without dairy, then maybe you already know what you can use for your substitutions. Anyway, let's get started. So I kind of pre-measured and put everything out instead of having a work surface full of ingredients here. So we're going to start with 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Now I'm making a gluten-free version, so what I have here is 1.5 cups of white flour, or excuse me, rice flour, and 1/2 cup of tapioca, and then a teaspoon of xanthan gum. We're just going to pour it into the bowl here. I'm going to set that aside. You might also notice that I am wearing gloves. This recipe, you have to get in with your hands and do some mixing, and I just found that gloves just make it a little bit easier for me. I prefer using the gloves. You certainly don't have to. All right, and to that, so we're going to mix all of our dry ingredients together. And just so, also I should tell you, I have preheated the oven to 375, and I also go a little bit extra. So the trick with the scones is that when it says chilled cream, they mean chilled cream. Okay, and when it's cubed, the cubed butter that we're going to be using, it has to be cold, like right out of the fridge, cold. And that seems to be a key thing. I did not do that previously when I made some scones, and they didn't turn out that great. So there's definitely a key thing with everything being cold and chilled. And you're going to be working the dough quite a bit, which will actually kind of warm things up and consolidate. So don't worry about things being clumpy or anything like that. They will turn out, I promise. All right, so I pre-prepped with a sheet of parchment paper on the cookie sheet, and then I have discovered that wax paper works really great when it's time to shape the dough and cut it out. So I'll show you that little trick that I figured out here when we get to that point. But it really helps to get everything set up ahead of time, because after you've worked the dough and gotten it set up, your hands are really goopy, and it's very difficult to touch things and try to maneuver things with goopy hands. So So I try to do as much pre-setup as I possibly can. All right, so we've got our flour. The recipe will say 6 tablespoons of sugar. Well, 4 tablespoons is a 1/4 cup. So we've got a 1/4 cup of sugar plus 2 tablespoons of sugar. We've got a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And we've got 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Not baking soda, baking powder. Okay. Now we've got all of our dry ingredients. And so what we're going to do is we are just going to mix them. You can use a sifter and put everything in a sifter and then sift it. Or you can just use a wire whisk, or any kind of whisk probably. I happen to have a wire one. And then mix all the ingredients really, really well. If you've ever bitten into something and gotten a clump of baking soda or baking powder, you know that that is not awesome. Okay, or salt. So we're just going to make sure that all the dry ingredients are incorporated evenly. Just takes a little bit. I kind of fluff as I go to kind of mimic maybe what would be happening if I had used a sifter. Kind of get a little bit of air in the ingredients. Okay, got that. Then we're going to set that aside. So now we're going to start incorporating wet ingredients. And the first thing that we're going to do is that we are going to start with a 1/2 cup of butter, 1 stick of butter. And it has to be cubed. So let me just grab this out of the fridge here. So I already have a stick of butter mostly started. And what I do is I cut it in half lengthwise and then cut it in half, cut, like 1/2-inch pieces crosswise. So then you end up with small chunks of butter. The smaller you get your chunks of butter, the easier it's going to be to incorporate them into the flour mixture with the pastry knife and pastry cutter. That cut chunk is kind of big, so I'm just going to cut that a little bit smaller. All right, so this is a pastry cutter, pastry knife. You could use this for making dough. There's several different other types of uses for it. It's just one of those things, even if you're not a baker, occasionally you might need it. I use it for when I'm making deviled eggs, actually, and you can use it to cut up the yolks and get the yolks, small, so then you can kind of mix them. That's just what I've always done. Okay, so we've got our butter in here. We're going to be incorporating it. However, we need that half a cup of heavy cream chilled. So I have experimented, and what I have discovered is that if I put it in the freezer too soon, then it gets too cold and it freezes solid. It will actually freeze. And so I have timed it where just about the time that it takes me to incorporate the butter into the flour mixture is just about the perfect amount of time to get this chilled. So I'm going to stick this in the freezer. Very carefully as to not spill. Okay, and perfect. Now that will be chilling. So now we're going to grab our pastry knife and we're just going to start cutting in the butter. It doesn't take that long, but it can be a bit of a process. And I get a little butter knife here, table knife, and I use it throughout the entire process. I use it to level off my cups when I'm measuring out. I level off the ingredients using the knife, and then I also use it to scrape my pastry knife as we go along, and then you'll see that I use it further down the process as well. Pretty good. I think you can see here. See how coarse it looks? It's actually fairly fluffy, but you can see that it's not that smooth flour consistency, that fine flour consistency. It's got a little bit more of a coarse, sandy consistency. All right, we're gonna call that good. A few little chunks of butter is okay. They will melt into the scones as they bake, and that is not a bad thing. Okay. So the recipe will give you a couple of items that I don't use. I don't have the things. So the recipe includes some zest of 1 lemon that you would incorporate in. I don't have lemon zest. I almost never have lemon zest, so I have never put the lemon zest in. I'm sure it would be great. And if you're wondering what lemon zest is, it's just the skin of a lemon. They can like scrape the skin off with there's a tool, a little grater tool that you can use, a zester actually, I think is what it's called. And you can get just kind of that bitter smell, bitter tart skin off of the lemon. I don't put that in. It also has you create a sand wash. Oh my goodness gracious. It is Sunday morning. My brain is not engaged. You can also create an egg wash, and you can use coarse sugar. After the scones are cut and placed on the cookie sheet, you can put some of the egg wash on there and then sprinkle some of the coarse sugar on there. I don't bother doing that either, but if you want to make them really pretty, the egg wash will make the tops really shiny and really fancy looking, and then the sugar just makes them look even more fancy looking. You're welcome to do that. It will be included in the recipe, even though I'm not going to be doing that today. Okay, so we've got that. Now is the time to go get our chilled heavy cream. All right, that is perfect. I'm gonna grab a fork. Now it's time to incorporate our wet ingredients. So what I do, recipe calls for an egg. So I just go ahead and, usually I don't drop the shell in there. Welcome to real life cooking and not America's Test Kitchen, where they probably do have potentially multiple takes. So we're just going to do this in one take. But you can see, I don't know if you can see, but the cream has chilled perfectly. It is starting to get more solid, but it did not completely get solid. And then the other thing is, it says a tablespoon of vanilla extract. I don't typically measure this out. I just pour it in till it looks good. We really like vanilla, so even if we do too much vanilla, that's not a problem. Okay, so then I just kind of mix this together with the fork a little bit, get it all incorporated, and then we're going to pour it in. And that. All right, and now we mix. Now, keeping things cold is really, really important. And so there's a lot of things, I know I keep stepping out of screen view to get things out of the fridge or put things in the freezer, but it's really important that the things that are cold stay cold. The recipe calls for a pint of fresh blueberries. I don't use fresh blueberries, and I certainly wouldn't use a pint. Oh my gosh. Way too many blueberries. Okay, so now I don't know if you can see, I've got this fairly well mixed, but it's still kind of clumpy, not really mixing together very well. So what I'm going to do is, this is the point where I'm going to mix things by hand here. It's this nice soft dough. I use frozen blueberries, and it doesn't take very many to overwhelm the dough, and you'll see here what I'm talking about here in just a minute. So I'm going to scrape those off. I'm going to grab the blueberries out of the freezer. And I kept them in the freezer up to this point because I want them to stay frozen. I do not want them to have a chance to thaw. But this is one of those things, at this point, it is helpful because from now on my hands are going to be goopy. So anytime that you can pre-do things with non-goopy hands, that's very helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my cookie sheet here because I'm going to be using that here shortly. This will not take long. So you can see I've got my parchment paper. I get the roll parchment paper, and then I just kind of take my fingernails and just, because it'll want to roll back up on itself, right? Really annoying. So I flip it the opposite way, and then I put it down, and then I just kind of take my fingernail and kind of score along the edge of the pan, and that kind of keeps it where it won't keep trying to curl up on me. All right, so now we're gonna grab a hold of this, and we're just gonna kind of work it. You don't want to overwork it. You can definitely overwork it. As with most things like pie crust and stuff, which is like the bane of my existence. I cannot make a good pie crust. I don't know what the deal is, but again, I'm not a baker, so. All right, so now I've gotten all of that dry flour incorporated back in, but I didn't overwork the dough. Now I'm going to take the blueberries and I'm just going to sprinkle them in. I'm only going to use about that many. I'm going to push them in. And the recipe, I think, says fold the blueberries in. Well, I guess you can fold them in if you have fresh ones. The frozen ones are a little bit hardier, which is another reason I like to use them. I also like the frozen ones because they have typically little ice crystals on them, which will incorporate a little bit of moisture into the dough. Okay, so again, I'm not going to overwork it. So you saw how quickly that got incorporated. So that can go to the side. Now comes the fun part. So I'm going to grab my wax paper. I'm going to split the dough that's in the bowl in half. As close to half as you can get. It does not have to be exact. Okay, and then I kind of do just a little bit of pre-shaping. You want it to be like in a ball. And then I put it on the wax paper. Kind of not too far from the edge, not too close to the center. Now, you fold it over, the other half of the wax paper over, and you press down. And you want there to be, and then you can kind of come in and reshape it a little bit because the dough will kind of split just a little bit. If you've got a funky blueberry, you can move it. Blueberry that's hanging out. So I would say that's probably about 1 inch thick. You just press it down till this is about 1 inch thick. And then I take my handy dandy knife that I've used the whole way through, and I cut pie-shaped squares, 8 of them. Okay, now you would think, oh, you just pick them up and you just peel it. Well, amazingly, they will actually like still cling to each other and tear. So what I do is I put that back over, I flip it over, I peel the bottom off, and now from here, I can pick up the squares and put them on the tray, cookie sheet. So I'm trying to find my edges here. And you don't have to do this, but I like to alternate. And you can flip them around. You could put them, because they're going to be more flat, so you could do it like that. That has a blueberry kind of sticking up, so I'm going to leave that one like that. But now I got that guy. This little blueberry fell out, so we're just going to stick them there. And it doesn't look like much. I mean, it's a fairly dense dough. Don't panic. They will rise as they bake, and they will be fluffy, and they will be delicious. Don't worry. Okay, we've got the second half of our dough. So you can see, I didn't put very many blueberries in, but this is chock full of blueberries, right? So I'm going to do that. I've got it shaped. Just over the top. Press it down. Okay, I'll come back in, reshape the edges a little bit. I like to have them uniform. I don't like to have them all kind of split and cracked. That could just be me being OCD, but okay. All right. We are going to put these into a 375 degree oven, and we are going to cook them. Bake them for approximately 20 minutes. I found that 20 minutes is usually pretty good. Occasionally, if I feel like maybe they need a little bit more time, I will go in like 1 minute increments. The thing with gluten-free, it's not as forgiving. When you use gluten-free flours, it's not as forgiving as wheat flour. And so it doesn't take much for it to burn. So you have to be really careful. I think if you're just making them regular and not making them gluten-free, you probably have a little bit more forgiveness there. Okay, so that is that. Gloves go away. Hands are now clean. Okay, put in the oven. And set our timer for 20 minutes. All right, so while that's baking, I'm just gonna clean up and then we will check back in when they're done baking. It has been 20 minutes, so we're going to take a look here and see what we have. Ooh, those are perfect. You see how they are golden brown on the top, but not too brown? That is perfect. So we're just gonna pull these guys out. So we got the scones out of the oven. They look perfect. You can see they've got a really nice golden brown on the bottom and a little golden brown on the top. Now, if you had done the egg wash with the sanding sugar, they would have a shiny appearance with the little sugar sprinkled on top, which makes them a little bit sweeter, but I don't feel like they really need more sugar. The 6 tablespoons seems to be enough. So now what we want to do is I'm going to break one open for you and show you that even though the dough looked really dense while we were working it, it actually comes out really light and fluffy and flaky, and the blueberries have added a lot of moisture to the dough. And it is fabulous. I will not eat it because then I will talk with my mouth full of food, which isn't awesome. But I wanted to thank you all for watching my video today. If you have any questions, please reach out. I'm happy to do the best that I can. Like I said, I'm not a baker or a cook, but this is something I feel like I can do it reasonably well, so I thought I would share it with you guys. Anyway, Happy New Year. Hope you enjoyed watching. Please hit like and subscribe if you haven't already, and take care, everybody. Bye.